billions of dollars are spent, no rural broadband is delivered. How do you change that program? Because I think the fundamental thing I'm getting at here is taxpayers don't feel like they get any value.
Yeah.
That government has divorced money from value. And that
Yeah.
problem fundamentally has to be fixed.
Yeah.
So rural broadband being the specific example.
I think it's a great example.
How do you redo that?
Jon Stewart just absolutely destroyed the core illusion of modern governance to Kamala Harris's face, stripping away every single procedural excuse the administration has left. While everyone else is parsing the polite political crosstalk, they are completely missing the terrifying reality underneath it. Because once you follow this logic past the Beltway jargon, we aren't just talking about inefficient bureaucracy. We are talking about an entire political apparatus that uses process as a shield to hide its own systemic failure. If you want the unfiltered truth behind this clash, hit subscribe, drop a like, and let's roll the tape.
Establishment would agree with that?
I don't know who the establishment is at this point.
Right. Oh God, that's a whole different problem, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it?
Wouldn't you be considered as the flag bearer for the Democratic run for presidency? I would assume that you're at least in the conversation as the establishment leader of the Democratic Party. I would say you're probably the most well known, and probably Bernie is the establishment leader of kind of the progressive wing of that party. But I would imagine that your leadership in that area would be significant.
Yes, I agree. And part of the work that we have to do for the Democratic Party going forward is really come to terms with what are we fighting for and not just what we're fighting against. I think part of the problem with where we are now, call it establishment or something else, whatever label we want to put on it, is my fear is that we cannot be a party that is so almost myopically focused on the guy that's currently in the White House that we are not paying attention to, one, how we got here, which is that this is about a pattern that was decades in the making, but two, understanding that where we are right now, there's a whole apparatus around support for this guy and what he's doing. And it is part of an agenda that, I mean, they published it with Project 2025.
Right.
That thing didn't come out of thin air. It's a product of a lot of folks, including Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society. And so part of how Democrats should be thinking about leadership and getting through this moment is, yes, fighting what's wrong, doing like what we're doing to fight against redistricting, but also we've got to understand that we cannot just be focused on Donald Trump. We need to not only be against something, but also we need to be understanding of how we got here and that it's a bigger apparatus and not just the one guy. But the second point that is equally important, which we're not emphasizing, is what we stand for, right? And so not just fighting, it's about anti-Trump, but it is about healthcare. It is about affordable housing. It is about what we need to do around childcare. Because people got to know what you stand for so that they're clear about what they're fighting for.
And that's, the issue sometimes that I have with the Democratic Party is there's certainly a high-minded kind of rhetoric around what they stand for. Because I've heard that, healthcare is a right.
Yeah.
And everyone deserves a chance. And it's generally framed as a moral argument.
Right.
And so the rhetoric is somewhat audacious, locked into that sense of purpose and being and what we should be. But the governance is generally, as we talked about, more timid. It's the audacity of hope and the timidity of what the Republicans will allow us to do. And I think what's frustrating and I can only speak for myself on this, is the dance that we end up doing.
Yeah.
Because I look at healthcare as, is it a right? I don't know. But it's certainly a commodity, and it's one that the market has failed on. And if government isn't at its purpose there to help with outcomes that the market fails on.
Stewart cuts right through the high-minded rhetoric here. And honestly, He hits on the exact frustration that millions of everyday Americans feel when looking at their bank accounts. The establishment loves to lecture us about morality, framing healthcare, housing, and childcare as fundamental rights when they need your vote. But the moment they step into the halls of power, that grand moral crusade magically shrinks into a technical debate over budget rules and what the opposition will permit. When you constantly compromise before the fight even begins, you aren't protecting the system. You are teaching the public that the government's true function is to guarantee corporate cash flows while leaving regular families to struggle with market failures on their own.
Yeah, absolutely right. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you on that, which is we are so mired in process, especially people who have been in the system for a while, that we are almost blind, or we place a secondary importance on the progress piece
Right.
because we get mired in the process piece. Look, here's part of how I think about this moment. Things may get worse before they get better under this guy, okay? And we at the end of this are going to be looking at a whole lot of debris. And they are breaking things. And there is a moment then of how we should be thinking about this.
Think about what's actually being admitted here. The sitting leadership is openly acknowledging that the entire political class has become completely blind to actual progress because they are hopelessly obsessed with their own internal rulebooks. But notice the pivot. She immediately shifts the blame to the external debris left by the opposition breaking things. It's a classic institutional defense mechanism. If you can convince the voters that your hands are tied by a broken process, you never have to take accountability for your own lack of results. It lets leadership completely off the hook. They get to collect donor checks, clear the baseline of simply not being the other guy, and leave the public to navigate a crumbling reality.
A moment for which we should be also thinking about where the opportunity will be. And part of the opportunity, I believe, will be in transforming some of these systems that were broken before, that were failing us before, and that we cannot afford to be nostalgic about trying to recreate something that actually wasn't even working before this guy got there. And that's where there's going to have to be a moment of clarity around honest conversations about the failures of the system, with an acknowledgement also of the importance and the strength of those systems, like that the fact that government should maintain its principal responsibilities around public health, public education, and public safety. But on all three counts, one could argue, yeah, kind of good job, but kind of not.
Mm-hmm.
So let's also, and this is how part of how I've been thinking, is that we've got to also have as part of our capacity to leapfrog beyond this moment and think about when we get back some leverage around the House, the Senate, and the White House, how are we going to transform systems to make them better with an acknowledgement of what wasn't working?
So in the reflection of that, having been a part of the system, not so much as a prosecutor and district attorney and attorney general, but as a senator, as a vice president, as a candidate for president, in all those different roles. So you were in those roles for, I think, a good decade, I would say, probably more, right?
Yeah, sure. About a decade, yeah.
The 107 days wasn't maybe enough time for you to consider that being in that crucible, but certainly your experience in that past decade and in the year since the election, with a little bit more time to reflect, what is it fundamentally about the system that you think we've gotten wrong?
I think what we've gotten wrong is we have mired progress in processes that are outdated and are not
A
grounded.
bureaucratic system.
Yes, and we can label it the bureaucracy. But more specifically, we have not grounded our measure of effectiveness based on metrics. We think if we're just working hard and we're moving and that wheel is moving, then all is good, instead of, frankly, adopting an approach more aligned with, I think, what the private sector, how, it thinks in terms of asking ROI. What is the return on the investment?
Right.
What are the metrics? Giving ourselves timelines and deadlines to actually implement a good plan, but also, and this may sound contradictory, giving ourselves enough room to actually come up with a good idea that can work. So not rewarding a bunch of grand gestures that actually are meaningless in terms of the ability for implementation.
Right.
You understand my point, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think any good public policy ends with an exclamation point. I don't.
Jeb. All right.
But also then giving ourselves and holding ourselves accountable for speed around implementation.
So talk me through rural broadband. Rural
Sure.
broadband, we had a ton of money that was earmarked for it through the
Yeah.
government. It's certainly a very worthwhile project. It's bringing areas that don't have accessibility to the information systems that
Yeah.
they will need to progress economically and all those different things.
Yeah.
The government comes up with during Biden administration a rural broadband investment plan. Billions of dollars are spent. No rural broadband is delivered. How do you change that program? Because I think the fundamental thing I'm getting at here is taxpayers don't feel like they get any value.
Yeah.
That government has divorced money from value. And that
Yeah.
problem fundamentally has to be fixed.
Yeah.
So rural broadband being the specific example,
I think it's a great example.
how do you redo that?
Well, part of it is, one, a critical examination. Part of it is this.
Mhm.
When you're coming up with the good idea, at the very same time that you're thinking about the good idea, there should be an equal amount of attention being given to how's the thing going to be implemented. Instead of everyone sitting around clicking their glasses, oh, success, success, because we got the thing passed, right? In terms of whether it's a bill or whatever it is, that executive order, whatever it is that is necessary to actually proclaim the idea.
But is it in the design? So you got an idea. We need to get rural broadband out to areas that don't have it. So is it the committees that design the bill? Is it the lobbyists that influence the bill?
I think it's everyone. It's
the whole
everyone.
system
It's
is
the
not
whole
working directly.
Well, it's not.
Okay.
It's focused on implementation, right? So if you're focused on it, this is where we're going to get very micro. But I'm good with
Get
that,
it,
right?
baby.
Yeah. Right? So let's think about,
Micro.
okay, so
Yeah.
we have a plan for rural broadband, but
Okay.
it's going to have to go through all these administrative processes once the plan has been agreed on. This is part of the challenge, frankly, of a democracy, but we need to do better. We need more efficiency in our democracy, because here's how democracy works. You come up with the idea and the plan, and then everyone says, okay, plan has been made. Now let's debate the plan. Right? And so
Right.
what ends up happening is we start then challenging the implementation of the plan around the bureaucracy, around agencies, and how long it takes for them to do their review.
And there are 90-day periods and 120-day periods and on and on.
And it needs to be shortened, and it can be shortened. And here's the other piece of this that I think is going to be maybe controversial, but here you go. AI can help us with a lot of that. For example, reviewing permits. It literally is about looking at numbers and figuring out what are the patterns to figure out, is this thing possible? So there is a piece of this that is about government adopting technology, not around making policy decisions, but certainly about assisting us with this kind of the part of the process that's about just checking the numbers, checking the patterns. So there is that piece of it.
In terms of where the need.
This rural broadband example is the absolute smoking gun of institutional rot. We are talking about billions of taxpayer dollars vanishing into a black hole of administrative reviews, agency back and forth, and corporate subsidies, while actual communities are left completely disconnected from the modern economy. And what is the response? To suggest that maybe AI can look at the math on the forms. That's a staggering cop-out. The math isn't the problem. The incentive structure is the problem. When you design giant spending bills that require a vast army of lawyers, consultants, and corporate compliance managers just to approve a piece of paper, the money gets entirely consumed by the system before a single shovel hits the dirt. When a government fundamentally divorces the money it takes from you from the actual value it delivers, the entire social contract begins to snap. People don't live in a world of procedural text. They live in a world of rising rent, unbuilt infrastructure, and hollow promises. If the leadership class continues to treat governing as a process to be managed rather than a duty to execute, they will inevitably face an electorate that decides to burn the entire process down. Until next time, this is Clash Points. Hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and let us know if you think the system is completely past the point of fixing.